Hi everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be bringing you a discography review, and this discography review will be for All That Remains. Now before I do begin with this, I do want to address something about my Q&A video. Guys, I got all the questions inserted into the Q&A, so I'm sorry if you are someone who hasn't asked a question yet. Maybe next time around. Also, I did want to address that this upload looks like it's going to be painful because this Q&A is almost an hour long. It's like 40 some minutes long or something like that. Yeah, it's a long video, but it's gonna take a little while for it to upload. So I know I said I'd probably upload it a few days after the Q&A, but after the announcement, that is. But it's more looking like maybe like a week or so from now. I don't know. But just be patient with me. The Q&A will be up regardless. So yeah. But nonetheless, I'm here talking about All That Remains, and I figured I would do an All That Remains discography review because, you know, I guess leading up to their new album, Victim of the New Disease, I was actually thinking about reviewing just one All That Remains album, but I figured, why not review their whole discography in one video? So we can start off with All That Remains' debut album, Behind Silence and Solitude, which I think is a really great album. I know there's a lot of people that don't like it. I know that All That Remains' older material, like their first couple of albums, aren't really as popular as their newer stuff, like their current stuff. Obviously that does play a factor in, you know, the more older stuff being a lot heavier and a lot more aggressive than their newer stuff. Like their newer stuff sounds a lot more mainstream. Well, not this new album they're coming out with, but we'll get into that later. So yeah, Behind Silence and Solitude is just such a classic. Great debut, I'd say. It's got classics like the title track, Follow, Clarity, Erase. Clarity, I think, is such an underrated All That Remains song. I really love the guitar work in this song, and I think it's just a really good song all around. There's some parts of this song, too, that kind of remind me of Old School In Flames, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, Clarity, excellent track. And as well as Erase. Erase is one of my other favorites. I really dig this one. I like the instrumentation and everything it has going for it. And, you know, same could be said about the album that came after, which is their second release, This Darkened Heart. Now, out of all their older stuff, this is probably the album that I'm least familiar with. I remember listening to this one, and from what I've heard from it, I really like. I think there's some good stuff on it. Not really much to say about This Darkened Heart, but I think it's a good follow-up to their debut. And then, of course, we get to the just, in my opinion, where All That Remains really set their foundation, I guess you could say. Like, this is like where they really establish what kind of band they wanted to be. And that is the album, The Fall of Ideals. Now, this album is incredible to me. It's still an album that holds up for me. I think it's a great release, and it's basically everything that you would want in a metalcore album. Like, I can't think of a song on this album that I don't like. Now, obviously, there are songs that are better than others, but I will tell you some of the highlights. Of course, the fan favorite, This Calling. I mean, everybody knows the chorus. If you're an All That Remains fan, it's a very memorable song. Not Alone is also very memorable. It has, it's more on the upbeat side, more like, it's a song that can kind of get you pumped up a little bit. And Whispers, I think, is a very underrated All That Remains song. Yeah, and 6 is another song that I really dig. Definitely one of my favorite All That Remains songs of all time. The instrumentation, especially in the middle part, is just outstanding to me. As well as The Air That I Breathe. All That Remains classic right here. I mean, this is another one of those songs that can kind of really get you pumped up. Yeah, fantastic album. I mean, I think that every metalcore band that is like forming or newly formed or whatever should really take notes from this album. Like there's a lot of metalcore bands that really need to take inspiration from this album, because this album to me demonstrates metalcore perfection. Yeah, The Fall of Ideals is just great All That Remains album. That's all I gotta say. I would consider it their best. That's my opinion, though. And then we got their fourth album, which is Overcome. Now, this might actually be my second favorite All That Remains album, which is pretty surprising, considering the direction that they took with it. There's a lot of people that say that this is where All That Remains started going downhill. I can see where they're coming from. Like, I do think that this was like the first step in the direction that they took for a while. But I actually very much enjoy this album. It's good music and it ages well, and it has a very good feel, start to finish. 2 Weeks was actually one of the first All That Remains songs I've ever heard. It is more commercial, more radio friendly than like their past work, but I think it's really good. I think it's a great song. It's catchy, and it's such a memorable All That Remains song, I think. Days Without is another great song, very underrated in my opinion. Yeah. Overcome has a lot of more commercial, more radio-friendly stuff. Like, I can only imagine what fans were thinking during this time. Now, I wasn't a fan of All That Remains when this album came out. I got into All That Remains like late 2015, something like that. Like around the Order of Things era. But yeah, I can only imagine what fans were thinking at the time when this album first came out. Like, what happened to this band, What happened when they, came out with really heavy material and then they do stuff that's, that sounds like the more mainstream bands, But I actually like this sound for All That Remains, and I wouldn't mind if they return with something like this. But, again, we'll talk about Return later on. Let's get on with the album for We Are Many. Now, I know there's a lot of people that say that this is within All That Remains' top 3 best albums. Would I agree with that? I'm not so sure. But I do think this is a really good album, but I feel like they did take the more mainstream stuff a little bit further with this album. Of course, you know how All That Remains did it back then. Like, they started becoming more softer, more radio friendly with every album they came out with. But I do like a lot of the stuff from For We Are Many. Dead Wrong, I think, is a great song. Maybe one of my favorites. Actually, it probably is one of my favorites. Definitely great stuff. Not really much to say about For We Are Many, but I think it's a good album. Next up we got A War You Cannot Win. Now, this is the album where the band really started to attract a more mainstream audience, I think. And this album did very much appeal to a lot of people that are more into like alternative metal and hard rock music. And I'm gonna assume that's because of the songs Stand Up and What If I Was Nothing. Now, I actually prefer Stand Up to the song What If I Was Nothing. That song, I don't know. Don't get me, I might get some flack for this, but I'm not too crazy about the song What If I Was Nothing. I think it's a little generic, and I think it's incredibly radio friendly. I gotta say, A War You Cannot Win has some pretty good stuff on it. Down Through the Ages, You Can't Fill My Shadow. You Can't Fill My Shadow has a really energetic tone to it, just a really nice vibe to the song. This album has it has some heavy tracks, but it does rely more on the commercial side. But I think it's a pretty decent album. Is it one of their best? No, nowhere near one of their best, I don't think. But I think it's still a pretty good album for what it is. So yeah, let's move on to The Order of Things. Now, I'm not gonna lie. When I first listened to The Order of Things, I was like, yeah, this is pretty good. This is something I can really dig. But this was at a time when I was a fairly new fan of the band. Like I said, I got into them around this era when this album came out, so that should tell you something. But nowadays, this album hasn't really aged that well, I hate to say it. Now, is there still some tracks on this album that I would consider good? Yeah. I mean, I like the I like This Probably Won't End Well, even though it is more on the commercial side. I think it's really good. No Knock, I think, is also really good. This is a real, this is a hard-hitting song, I'd say. I think this album's biggest problem is it has too many songs that blend together too easily. Definitely one of their weakest. It's probably their second weakest, behind the next album that's coming out. Yeah, Order of Things, is it terrible? I wouldn't go as far to say that it's downright awful, but definitely one of their weakest. And now we get to Madness. Now, Madness, boy, what do I have to say about this album? This is, without a doubt, All That Remains' worst release. And I think for multiple reasons. The blandness and this just terrible direction that they took. Like, it's so rednecky, it's so, like, bland, and it's this album in particular has so many problems with it. It's so boring to listen to, and you know, they took it a little country with some of these songs, and it's modern country, which is definitely a big no-no for me. Yeah, Madness, definitely not a good album. Definitely the worst of the entire All That Remains discography. And then we got the new All That Remains album coming out this year in November, which is Victim of the New Disease, and I'm happy to say that this album is sounding like a return to form. Something similar to The Fall of Ideals, if not overcome. I mean, they're bringing back some of the aggression, the songs don't sound as bland. I think All That Remains learned their mistakes from Madness, which is why this album is coming out like so soon after Madness. So yeah, that is my review of the All That Remains discography, and I'm really excited for their new album, guys. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching, have a good one, and take care.